already introduced you guys to the Carli-SPEC shocks to the Ram leveling kit for the 3500s. Behind us we have a 3 1/4 lift on a 2020 Ram 2500, another application that we just finished tuning. This system includes the 3 1/4 inch lift springs in the front with all geometry correction that you need, from the adjustable track bar to the sway bar drops or torsion sway bar, the bump stop drops, the radius arm drops. We've got a whole bunch of options like the fabricated radius arm steering stabilizers and alike, but basically this is the kit that we wanted to build. This kit corrects all geometry. It's a lot more linear in axle path. It has more suspension travel. And in the rear, we do our lift springs, either the R1 coil springs or the R2 coil springs. The R1 coil springs are going to be the slightly reduced spring rate from factory that are longer travel. You will sacrifice a little bit of payload capacity with those, but it is that softer spring rate that everybody wants when you want that softer ride out of the heavy-duty truck that spends most of its time unloaded. Additionally, we have to do the same geometry correction in the rear that we do up front because you're lifting a 5-link coil spring truck. Everybody's familiar with the rear yaw of the Ram 2500, the lateral motion of the axle as it goes through its vertical suspension travel. The goal is to mitigate that as much as possible. If you leave the track bar in the factory position, you get a ton of movement. It's almost undrivable. So what we did is a track bar drop bracket. We leave the factory track bar in, we put a drop bracket on the frame that basically flattens out that track bar, mitigating the side-to-side movement of that rear axle. When you minimize it, you minimize the feel of the yaw, but you do still have the shorter factory track bar. On this truck, you'll find our prototype rear track bar, where we get to re-engineer and redesign the track bar in its entirety. In the geometry world for suspension, the goal is always the longest and flattest track bar within the constraints that you're working with on the vehicle chassis, wheels, tires, whatever it might be that you're going to get into. Our rear track bar drops from the frame end and extends 6 inches, lifts from the axle end extending 6 inches. The drop and the lift flatten it. The extension speaks for itself, being almost a foot longer than the factory bar. It achieves better angle, it achieves less lateral movement, and it basically eliminates yaw from the platform throughout the entire stroke of suspension travel. In the rear of this truck, we start off with our R1 coil spring. The R1 coil spring is slightly reduced from the factory spring rate. When everybody who buys a heavy-duty truck talks about how the unloaded truck kicks on the highway through culverts, whatever, it's because you're oversprung. The higher spring rate from the factory is to accommodate for a load that isn't present. So when somebody who's frequently unloaded wants a better on-road ride, yes, we can achieve a lot of that through shock tuning, but when you can change the spring rate baseline to a lower spring rate, you're going to get more axle movement to control. That's how you get that on-road ride out of the rear. The front doesn't have that problem. The spring rate is proper because you've got that heavy Cummins motor or that heavy Hemi motor with a proper spring rate. This customer is primarily unloaded, wanted to achieve the best on-road ride. That is a Carli-SPEC 2.5 shock with that R1 coil spring. For customers that either have a constant bed load, are frequently towing, don't mind a little bit higher stance and a little bit stiffer ride from the higher rate coil spring, the R2 is a great option. You could pop that in and you could tow the capacity of the vehicle without requiring any airbag system to do so, which was previously unattainable in the Ram 2500 platform because coil springs by nature just don't haul like a leaf spring truck. And adding airbags just isn't quite as easy. If you look at our long travel airbag systems for the 3500, they're actually inboard of the frame rail right where the coil springs sit. What that leaves you with is airbags that you have to put between the axle, so the bump stop strike pad, and the factory bump stop location. The problem with this is that the collapse dimension of these airbag kits often far exceeds the normal bump stop height. So you end up giving up quite a bit of up travel to run that airbag system, which is counterproductive to the ride that you're trying to achieve. So the R2 coil was born from the customer that understands that nuance of not really wanting to run an airbag unless you have to, given that they're a necessary evil, but still hauls with the truck and wants a better ride than factory. Ram makes 2 different trucks for a reason, and then there's subcategories within these trucks. There's a 2500, there's a 3500. There's a 2500 coil spring, there's a 2500 air ride. There's a 3500 leaf spring, there's a 3500 air assist. Each of these trucks has its own design intent. Behind us, we have a 2500 with coil springs. Of the lot, this is by far the most capable on-road and off, in stock form and when you put the Carli kit on. All you're doing with the Carli suspension is throwing an exponent on the performance of whatever that chassis is capable of. So where does this kit fall? Who's gonna buy this suspension system? The 3 1/4 lift in the front, the 1-inch lift in the rear, these are the softest spring rates that we offer. The customer that doesn't spend a ton of his time loaded is going to want this system because it offers the best on-road and off-road performance. We spent a ton of time tuning on the highway, on different frequencies of expansion joints, on-road, grocery store parking lots, on speed bumps, culverts, you name it, we did it. We focused a ton on road, but then we also took this thing out in the dirt. So again, washboards, gravel, big holes, rollers, bumps, doesn't really matter, we drove it. Just to make sure that this thing was up to the performance level you've come to expect from a 2.5, but we focused mostly on highway tuning. But you wouldn't struggle to take this thing to the desert, tow in your toys behind, unhook the trailer, and go hit whatever fire road that you can point this thing.